Ayan, mga kameta, kamusta kayo dyan? How are you? Happy weekend. Ayan, at least may time na kayo makapagpahinga. Medyo lagare tayo over the past week, mga kameta, especially itong World Cup na to. Grabe talaga yung schedule natin dito sa Asia. Umabot tayo ng 4-5 a.m. At least nakalusot yung isa para hindi all European finals ng World Cup natin. Of course, by the way, ang main topic natin today, ito pa rin na ito pa rin. I think we have to push some of the other topics to next week, including dun sa West Philippine Sea, yung talk natin sa Department of Foreign Affairs kahapon. Grabe, traffic, talk, etc. So, hindi natin mahabol mga yan. But today, gusto kong balikan itong issue ng Maharlika Fund na modifications na nangyari after yung massive backlash and outcry from all different sectors. No? Pag-usapan natin yan, mga kameta. But of course, before that, let me congratulate our friends in Argentina for making to the next round. That was a crazy game. I thought, eto na naman, isa pang major upset. But at least Argentina was able to pull it off after conceding 2 goals in the last 15-20 minutes, no, of the regular time. Pero yung Brazil, wala na yung Brazil eh. Samba kasi sila ng samba dun sa laro sa Korea. Tuloy na ganyan sila. Sa kakasamba, wala na silang fuego para sa next game sa Croatia. Tuloy. Ang tunay na GOAT, greatest of all time midfielder, Luka Modric, talaga was able to pull it off for Croatia. And grabe, akala natin nung nag-goal na si Neymar sa extra time, tapos ng usapan, pero yun pala mga kameta. By the way, mukhang connection natin is not at best. Hindi ko alam bakit, kanina pa ako. Siguro dahil ng Netflix itong mga alaga natin dito. Anyway, habang may connection pa tayo, at least hopefully we can talk about more and more things and more about World Cup hopefully next week as we get into the semifinals, finals, and the important round. Ito na mga kameta, ito na. Yan ang parati natin sinasabi mga kameta. Oh, by the way, mag-hi muna naman tayo dyan. Hindi lang sa mga kamaharlika natin, pero sa mga ka-direct yap natin. Mga Made in Malacanang Club. Kamusta kayo dyan? Talagang gandang-ganda talaga mga director nyo. Dyan! Nilait-light yung meme natin. Na hindi naman ako gumawa niyan. Na-repost ko lang yan. Meme yan from mga kaibigan natin, mga kapatid natin dyan sa TV5. Sabi ko talaga matutroll ako sa meme na yan. Kasi naman, hindi naman kaya itsura ko sa TV Hindi naman kaya itsura natin Yung parang puffy na gano'n. Tapos yung parang iba-iba kulay. Wala na. Tuloy. Tina-trash talk na tayo ni Director Yap na ano yan. na beauty tayo dyan. Na beauty bash tayo ni Direct Made in Malacanang, ang pinaka the best na director, pinaka Cannes Festival level na director. Ayan na yung mga ibang alaga natin, ang hina pa ng internet natin. Ito. Mamaya na tayong mag-aasaran. Pag-usapan natin yan, dumating na yung kape natin. Low energy pa naman tayo. Ito mga kameta, pag-usapan natin ito. Ito serious to Parati natin narinig sa mga iba dyan, yung mga kamaharlika, mga ka-unity, na huwag na kayong umangal dyan. Sunod na lang kayo dyan. Just accept. Just wag kayo nega, wag kayo bitter, whatever. I mean, first of all, speaking of bitterness, ang weird is, misa para mas bitter pa yung mga iba dyan na dapat nga happy na sila tapos na yung laban. Di ba? Nanalo naman sila Pero pag mga okray, including sa beauty natin, ayan, napaka-bitter naman nila. Di ba? Pero syempre maganda si Direk. So wala tayong magagawa dyan. Balikan natin ito. No, I mean, we keep on hearing na magpakabait kayo dyan, be nice, sunod na lang kayo sa gobyerno, wag kayo nega dyan, wag kayo hater, etc. Ako naman, my stance is very clear, no? There are times na you have to support the government, especially kung sound yung policy, may sensible naman yung sinasabi, may basihan, di ba? Pero kung wala naman basihan or problematic or hindi ito sang-ayon dun sa ating national interest among others, then syempre dapat magsalita yung taong bayan, di ba? Hindi naman pwede na tahimik lang tayo dyan at mangmang tayo dyan. So, natatawa tayo kasi sinasabi ng iba dyan, mataas na approval ratings natin dapat go na tayo niyan. Alampas sa 80% na approval ratings natin dyan. Wag na kayo magsalita, may universal support na. But That's not how it works in a democracy. Di ba? Sabi ko, oh, sige, pakita niyo yung October survey ng Okta ba yan or something na pinakita na 70-80% ay nag-approve sa ating administration. Of course, in their honeymoon phase, surprise, surprise na mataas. O bakit di niya lang pinapakita rin yung sobrang taas din ng disapproval dun sa management ng, for instance, economic issues like yung inflation problem, no? O fact din yan. O bakit din yung siniside yung part ng survey niyan, yung issue-based survey. Di ba? Di ba, mga kameta? 42% po ay nag-disapprove dun sa management ng inflation ng ating gobyerno earlier this year. Ako naman, personally, of course, I feel na medyo unfair naman yung ibang attack sa Marcos administration because hindi naman nila kontrolado yung mga all of the factors that contribute to inflation, including declining foreign exchange rates earlier this year, not to mention increasing prices of agricultural products, fertilizers, etc. due to yung crazy war ni Putin dyan sa Ukraine. Well, given na yan. Pero ang point ko is, napaka-selective naman yung mga ka-unity, ka-Maharlika natin dyan. Na gusto lang nila emphasize yung mataas sa approval, pero hindi nila sine-check yung mga mababa na approval sa specific issues, no? Especially something that has to do with economics. And in fact, this issue ng inflation was the only majority urgent issue dun sa mga urgent issues na tinanong sa ating mga kababayan. So for me, that clearly shows that this government may have general favorability, honeymoon phase, ang taas ng share of votes na napanalo nila. Ang dami pa natin mga made in Malacanang, mga vloggers dyan na tumutulong naman dun sa image, creative communications. Given yan. But that doesn't mean a blank check. That doesn't mean a carte blanche, no? And more importantly, clearly nafe-feel din ni Pangulong Marcos na something has to be done with the economics. So, kung tingnan mo si Marcos Jr., si Pangulong Marcos Jr. himself said that inflation is out of control. No? Siya mismo nagsabi, nung lumabas yung latest number na 8% yung inflation natin. Hindi tayo nagsabi yan. Si Pangulong Marcos mismo nagsabi yan. So, there's a recognition from no less than the government itself that on the economic front, they have to do more. And it just happens that the economic front, mga kameta, the economic front is also exactly where, no, President Marcos Jr. has staked his legacy, his policy commitments. It's kind of like a economy first kind of approach to governance and his presidency. And in fact, yung sinabi natin mga kameta dun sa isang op-ed natin earlier this year, ito yung sinasabi natin, si Pangulong Marcos mismo ay aminado na the inflation situation is out of control. Now, this is important in light of the fact that you had the 42% disapproval of the management of inflation of the president earlier this year when the inflation rate was even lower, mga kameta, was even lower back then. So obviously, there is some worry siguro inside that something has to be done about this and that we have to project competency. Ito yung sinasabi natin mga kameta, di ba? 42% yung disapproval at si Pangulong mismo ang nag-recognize na the inflation situation is a little bit tricky, di ba? Tingnan niyo na. Andyan yan, resibo yan. Wala akong sinasabi dyan. Tingnan lang natin dyan. Salamat kay Mother dito sa airmats natin dahil sa pakape natin. So, ang sinasabi natin mga kameta dito is clearly there's a recognition that people care a lot about economics, especially inflation, and that may negative perception pagdating sa management ng economy. And si Pangulong Marcos mismo nagsabi, the inflation situation is problematic. Again, to be fair, hindi naman kasalanan ni Marcos lahat yan, di ba? Maraming factors na contribute. But of course, there's an expectation the government does something about it. Kaya para sa akin, siguro naman itong Maharlika na yan was one way by the administration or the allies of the administration to say hands-on pa rin kami, right? To say that we're still doing something. To say that we are doing our best to protect the economic welfare of the country and that we are competent and all. In fact, kaya nga yung term na ginamit natin dun sa article natin mga kameta is this, technocratic populism. Populism kasi, let's be honest, maespeto tayo dito ng performativity. Medyo pa-performance. Technocratic dahil pag tignan mo yung idea ng sovereign wealth fund, it's a very technical issue, right? It's a finance issue more than even economics, no? It's a very technical issue. Kaya sabi ko, the best way to describe how President Marcos is approaching his brand of governance is technocratic populism, not necessarily authoritarian populism or penal populism, that we saw under President Duterte, or so-called polite populism or progressive populism that we see under whether Bernie Sanders or other Jokowi. So, varieties of populism talagang pinag-usapan natin dito. So, ako ang argument ko parati is when it comes to President Marcos, he combines two major trends in Philippine politics, right? Performative populism, there's a performativity aspect to it, diba? Creative communications, kumbaga. But also there's definitely an aspect of economics first, and let's look at all sorts of creative ways to enhance our economic productivity, bring investments, etc. Or at least, yun yung mga statements, yun yung mga policy thrust ni Paolo Marcos. So yun ang sinasabi ko, bakit yung mga trolls at saka yung mga ano natin dyan, hindi nila sinicite itong aspect na ito. Na clearly there's a recognition of that. So that's why some are saying maybe red herring or pa-distraction itong Maharlika Fund. I'm not sure that's exactly a correct argument, but it's one way to look at it. But for me, it's much more consistent with the technocratic populist brand of President Marcos. Now, my sense is when they first conceptualized and then later even announced the Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund, and clearly the term Maharlika na ginamit dyan, again, may populist, nostalgic populist, Marcosianism dyan, di ba? They thought they could just, go smoothly with it, na maging seamless yung process. Dahil, Sovereign Wealth Fund, how many average voters are familiar with the nitty-gritties of the idea of sovereign wealth fund? No? Yung mga katulad natin, we were forced to know about this because we had to understand international political economy, we had to understand the roots of global financial crisis, so on and so forth, Asian financial crisis. So, medyo may exposure tayo dyan. Pero of course sila, siguro akala ng iba dyan, sabihin natin, Singapore may ganon, social, ganon-ganon, to magiging Singapore na naman tayo, style tatay, di ba? Magiging Singapore na tayo, di ba? Problema, syempre, the devil is always in the details. There was a question about timing. So I think once it became clear dun sa ating mga kababayan na it's not really a 100% sure shot way to make the Philippines benefit from the current international environment, and that eto pa, kukunin pa nila yung resources potentially from other already allocated resources to pension funds, GSIS, SSS, at saka yung mga development bank agencies ng government, Land Bank of the Philippines, etc., Development Bank of the Philippines, ay medyo malma yung mga tao. At alam naman natin pagdating sa confidence sa ating gobyerno, mga kameta, medyo mawawala yung confidence dun sa good governance credentials ng mga government institutions natin. And this goes beyond just the current administration per se. No? It's a general sense that corruption is a serious problem in the Philippines, and corruption indeed is a serious problem in the Philippines. So if you look at the Philippines Corruption Index in 2022, medyo alanganin tayo, mga kameta. Right? So in fact, nag-decline na naman tayo this year sa corruption rankings. Ay. Nangyari sa internet natin. Bakit humina ang internet ko? Ito. I-project natin yan. So actually, bumaba pa nga yung rankings ng Philippines sa pagdating sa fighting corruption or dealing with corruption. So ito, tingnan natin, mga kameta. Ito. So ito yung latest na rankings na meron tayo. Nasaan na? Ayan. Ito. So if you look at it, corruption clearly is a big problem in the Philippines, and we're moving actually in the wrong direction, mga kameta. No? We're moving in the wrong direction. So hindi natin may sisi yung mga kababayan natin na they feel a bit uneasy, no? Medyo ilang sila, no? Dito sa mga ganyan tong style na proposal. So basahin natin, na. So ito yung so this is a ranking of the world, no? Different countries dun sa Global Risk Profile, GRP, no? Ng Corruption Index. Actually, bumaba yung rankings pa ng Philippines. So lumala yung issue ng corruption sa Philippines in recent years, no? So in the Global Corruption Index 2022, the Philippines ranked 105th out of 196 countries and territories. In 2021, the Philippines ranked 102nd. So medyo in the bottom 50% na tayo, bumaba pa lalo yung rankings natin. If I'm not mistaken, there was a time na we're doing quite fine, actually moving in the right direction, no? Ah, so actually in 2019 na, medyo mas okay pa yung ranking natin, 101st di ba? Now, dito sa ASEAN region, we're below Singapore, ranked 13th in the world, Malaysia ranked 49th in the world, Brunei 70th in the world. We're even worse than Indonesia and Thailand. Thailand is totally under a military essentially regime. Indonesia, well, very similar country to us, except 2 times, 3 times bigger than us. Hence also their problems with corruption. So the Philippines is worse than Singapore, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, and Thailand pagdating sa corruption problems, no? And slightly better than Timor-Leste and Vietnam. So clearly the Philippines has a long way to go. Even even by ASEAN standards, medyo nasa bottom half ang Philippines, no? Bottom half of the world and bottom half of ASEAN. So clearly there's a problem with corruption. At hindi naman kailangan na basahin na ating mga kababayan itong mga reports na yan. Alam na nila yung katotohanan, di ba? They see corruption every day, in different forms. So, hindi mo maisisisi yung ating mga kababayan na may mga concerns sila dito. And we saw that it's not only, ordinary folks or civil society folks or opposition folks. We saw business groups coming out. We saw former NEDA chiefs, top economists in the country coming out. At least 2 or 3 former NEDA chiefs coming out and criticizing it. And the Central Bank Governor of the Philippines also, initially at least, criticizing it. So, and all of this is, as I said, a big issue in light of yung nakita natin with nangyari sa Malaysia, which is a much more developed country than the Philippines. Now, but this is where things get interesting. Nung nagkaroon ng backlash and pressure, biglang nakita natin, medyo may pagka-change tone na. Nung una, todo depensa. Meron pang mga, what about, si Bam naman, may ganun din. Even though sobrang iba yung kay Bam, na it was actually an investment fund. So, ito po yung konteksto na sinasabi natin mga kameta na at first, they thought they could just get away with it, mabilisan lang. And then, nung nagkaroon ng kritisismo, todo depensa at sinasabi, ganun din ang ginawa ng mga dilawan, blah, 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 hindi rin gumana. Nung lumaki pa lalo yung kritisismo, galing pa sa mga business groups, top business groups among others, ayan na, no choice na. So, nakita natin, nag-respond na sila. Medyo change tone, change approach. No? So, 2 of the key proponents, I mean, of course, Professor Kimbo, Stella, who is an economist by training, no? So, hindi lang pa economist, but an economist by training. Siya mismo ay umamin na medyo they got off on the wrong foot. So, umamin siya na medyo sablay yung kanilang initial approach. Kaya ngayon, ang ginagawa po nila is they're reconsidering na etong some of the key provisions and modalities behind the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So that means it works. You have to, kung talaga may questionable, magsalita tayo. Huwag tayong magpauto dyan sa mga vloggers na yan, or huwag tayong magpadala lang dun sa mga kung ano nung sinasabi ng mga, ay nako, ayoko na magpangalan ng tao para alam niyo sino mga yan. Kasi yung mga trapo na iba dyan. Alright? So, tingnan nyo mga kameta. So, lawmakers are eyeing even more changes dun sa Maharlika Fund dahil nga nakita nila medyo problematic talaga Medyo problematic talaga. So, basahin natin yung kay Congresswoman Professor Stella Kimbo. Yung mga changes na kailangan nila introduce, no? So, pakicheck yan. Ito yung resibo natin, mga kameta. So, umamin siya na they got off on the wrong foot after all the backlash and all. And that siya bilang senior vice chair of the House Appropriations Panel, na tatanggalin na yung GSIS at SSS from the list of funders of Maharlika with an original planned contribution totaling 175 billion pesos. So, more than $3 billion, no? Or almost $3 billion. So, yung House panel nga, kinoconsider na tanggalin itong 25 billion that the national government would be putting in as seed fund as proposed under House Bill number 6398, filed last week by Martin Romualdez and Sandro Marcos. Ayon din sa kanya, we also recommended removal from the bill the 25 billion from the national government because again, it's probably not the right time. So, hindi lang kukuha sila ng pera dun sa GSIS and SSS, kukuha din sila ng pera dun sa national government revenues natin. Now, of course, under so much pressure as we're trying to deal with and at the same time cushioning our people against itong inflation, scourge of inflation. So right now, to be honest with you, that's still something that's evolving. So evolving pa yung plan, they're still dealing with what's happening. So that's why at this point, we're trying to sort of way where the chips will fall. So that's a little bit more dynamic at this point. It's not yet cast in stone. So even among economic managers, it's being discussed. So in short, nagets nila, maraming ayaw dito, maraming questionable provisions dito. So they are reconsidering it. Ito sabi pa niya, so sabi naman ni Castro, Representative Franz Castro, no? House Deputy Minority Leader, the truth remains that we have no surplus, we have no real wealth. If we look at our records, we are running on a deficit budget. Actually, the Bureau of Treasury said that our current debt is at 13.5 trillion pesos. What's the opposite of surplus? Isn't it debt? So we really have no surplus, we have a huge debt. So, now, I have some technical issue with that because you can have huge debt while having fiscal surplus, right? Because hindi mo naman kailangan bayaran lahat ng utang mo ngayon, di ba? Over time na yan. But I also get the point na in this time of uber uncertainty and in this time of really declining budget space or fiscal space, medyo masyadong risky or hindi reasonable na i-railroad ng natin mga ganitong proposals. And they may look nice on the surface, but actually if you scratch the surface, it's far more complicated than that. Now, si Sandro, nasaan na si Sandro? Yan, pag-usapan natin. Si Sandro rin, nag-announce siya dun sa kanyang Facebook na after much deliberations between authors, stakeholders, and listening to our kababayan, sana muna pa lang, di ba? The Maharlika Investment Fund will no longer draw from GSIS and SSS for funding. Will instead be utilizing profits from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. So now suddenly, it's the burden is shifted to the Central Bank of the Philippines. Kawawa naman yung BSP. Considering the Bangko Sentral chief earlier expressed doubt and skepticism about the Sovereign Wealth Fund for many reasons, including the fact that the central bank needs foreign exchange reserves to protect the Philippine pesos in times of massive pressure and on our currency and appreciation of US dollar. Not to mention, of course, yung concern na nangyaring massive corruption sa Malaysia. Na, sabi niya, even if maganda yung administration ngayon, what's the guarantee na hindi magkaroon ng kababalaghan sa mga susunod na administration? So that's a very, very good point raised by the Bangko Sentral Governor. But interestingly, now that they're not gonna get it on GSIS, SSS, parang may change tone din sa ibang kampo since na-push na rin sa kanila yung burden. Okay, so this is where it gets suddenly interesting. So now, medyo change tone din dito. Pinipressure or under pressure daw sabi nung iba dyan. Kasi sa kanila na lang daw kukunin. So, no more reservations bigla, sabi niyang ating Bangko Sentral. So, sabi ni Kimbos, dun sa isa sa mga proponents, the reason why we're putting this on the table, the dividends from the BSP, so yung mga profits na kinukuha ng BSP, is because the BSP joined us in the meeting this morning. So, yung pala, may meeting sila with Medallia. Nung na-reassure siya na hindi naman kukunin ang reserves but rather kukunin natin yung profits, ibig sabihin nagkaroon tayo ng windfall. So yun ang example ng profit na pwedeng ilagay sa pondo na i-invest natin. But my question is, how big is that? Is it big enough? Because, so, I want to hear from Medallia himself, but, well, the claim of the proponents of the bill is that he has been convinced na walang problema kasi hindi kukunin sa foreign exchange reserves sa mga dividends na kunin. But my point is, how big are the dividends of the BSP to be enough for a decent sovereign wealth fund? Because if it's too small, then there's no point. And can the dividends by the BSP use somewhere better also? Diba? Yun ang point natin. Kasi ganito yung sovereign wealth fund, invest natin abroad yan bakit natin invest abroad kung pwede naman natin invest domestically? Or bakit tayo mag-invest abroad kung kailangan natin ng konting cushion, no? Just in case, kailangan natin ng extra funds for other emergency domestically, no? Not to mention the inflation picture is still not improving. So, yun nga exactly. Tama si Michael. Saan yung data na sinisabi nila na may windfall ng malaki supposedly ang BSP? Nasaan? Pakita nyo kasi. At gusto ko marinig si Medallia mismo magsabi na okay. Diba? Remember guys, ang BSP ay independent. Dapat from government. So dapat we have to make sure na sensible yung mga sinasabi dito at hindi undue political pressure nilalagay sa Bangko Sentral katulad ng nangyayari sa mga bansang katulad ng Turkey na yung kanilang authoritarian leader si Erdogan ay pinipressure yung mga tao. Okay? Ay nako mga kameta. So yeah, I want to see the numbers. I want to see saan yung gaano kalaking windfalls. And I want to see an explanation that reallocation of these windfalls to the Sovereign Wealth Fund will not also have other undue negative influence pagdating sa ability ng Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas to efficiently allocate resources, including the ability to protect the Philippines against massive fluctuations in currency reserves and pressures on the price of our imports. Kasi kailangan nila defend din yung ating peso, but more than that, they also have to regulate domestic credit markets, money markets, investment flows, among others. So, kumbaga may susunod na kabanata dito na shift from SSS and GSIS sa BSP naman yung burden. Now, tignan natin kung anong explanation ng GSIS and SSS, but I want to see the numbers. So, tama sinabi ni Michael. Yan kanina ko pa sinasabi. There's no detail I've seen so far. We need data so that we can make proper judgment. Okay? Okay, so let me end on this point mga kameta. I know medyo weekend na, kailangan nyo rin magpahinga. Nakikita nyo medyo recovery pa rin tayo after very hectic schedule. Next week, God willing, gusto natin pag-usapan yung manangyari sa West Philippines, yung talk natin sa Department of Foreign Affairs. Let me say thank you so much dun sa ating mga kaibigan, mga patriots, friends natin sa Department of Foreign Affairs for the kind invitation to give a talk yesterday. Of course, as a reactor to ASEC Henry Bensurto, one of the chief architects behind our arbitration award. I was glad to share my views on the importance of the arbitration award in protecting the Philippine national interest, among other things, and also upholding a rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific. So we'll have hopefully more discussion that also on the implications of the Japanese warplanes landing in the Philippines for the first time since Second World War. May article tayo, pinost na natin dyan sa baba, pakicheck yan. Ipopost ko ulit yan. Pakicheck yan. Because Philippines is becoming very, very important geopolitically. So we have to have a discussion on that. But I just felt there's no way to end this week properly without going back dito sa change tone, change tactics na nangyari sa Maharlika Fund dahil sa sobrang backlash na nangyari from all different quarters. And no less than one of the proponents, Stella, Congressman Stella, Professor Stella, admitted that they started really on the wrong footing. So good. See? Kung may pressure, kung may organization, kung may responsible citizenship, then the government will be pressured to do its job properly. Diba? That's really the best way to avoid kind of trapo-style politics. No, I'm not saying they're trapo per se, but I'm saying in general, you need to keep their foot close to the fire of scrutiny, of public scrutiny. That's very, very important. Very, very important. Use the expression by Parent Bernie Sanders. Okay. Thank you very much mga kameta. Let me say thank you. I know, sorry, the internet connection is not so good. I don't know why. Ano nangyari? Kanina ko pa ni-reset yan. Okay. But let me say thank you sa lahat ng mga sumusuporta sa atin.